Everybody, welcome to the 6th edition of the Collections Technology Think Tank series. My name is Colin White and I'm the founder of Credit Connect Media. I hope everybody is well out there. I just wanted to go through the event and give you a quick welcome to tell you what you can do on the system, and also then I'll hand over to Chris Warburton, who's our chair for the day, and he'll tell you more about today's event and introduce the first session. So in this edition of the Think Tank, which we call Collections 4.1, the aim this morning is to bring together collections professionals to discuss collection strategies and assess the relationship between people and technology. We'll hear from a number of high-profile professionals, and we're obviously going to talk about the normal things that are happening at the moment. So the cost of living crisis is quite overused, but it is something that's really real at the moment, as the impact of high interest rates and obviously energy prices have impacted the economy. So we're going to talk more about that in a bit. But before we get into the nitty gritty of that, I guess, I'm going to just show you a quick plan of today's sessions. So obviously coming up shortly, we're going to talk about the value of communications. We'll have a break at 10:30. And then after that, for those who want to log in, we've got a collections risk session at 10:45, another break, and then we'll have measuring affordability and vulnerability, and then we'll round off at 1 p.m. this afternoon with the cost of living challenge. So the idea with the event is obviously you can tune into a session that's of most interest to you. So and we've got a lot of you registered today, so hopefully you'll enjoy the content that we've got planned for you. Just a quick one about the guide on how to use our platform. So top left, you've got information. That's obviously information about this event, and it's got a link there where you can click to log into the next session if you haven't already registered. So have a look at that. Third icon down is information on our speakers, so a bit of information about them and their background. There's a couple of things you can download as well, or links you can click to as well. And finally, you can view information on our two sponsors today. So the session supporters today are, in this one, are Callminer and Webio, and then Webio are the supporter of all the sessions. So have a look at that information, and obviously make contact with those guys because they're the people who make this event possible. So it'd be great if you can interact with them afterwards. But the most important icon is the speech bubble in the top left. On there, you can just type in your question. It can be anonymous if you want. But it will be shared with our audience, and if we get a chance, we'll put that into the mix of the questioning. We've had a couple of questions come through when you registered, so I'll add them to our group chat that Chris can see later as we progress through the day, and we will put those questions to our panel. Anything that we don't cover, we'll try and put forward into our review, which will hopefully right next Thursday. And we'll put those questions to our panelists and round up any other information about the event. So look forward to getting your input on today's event. So let's move forward and start with the first session. And the way that's going to work is I'll hand over to Chris, who's chairing the session. He'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll get the conversation started. And then I'll round up just before 10:20 and close off the session. So let me hand over to Chris Warburton from Morrow Strategy, and he can let our conversations begin. Chris, over to you.
Thanks very much, Colin. Really appreciate the comments. So I think we've got a really great session, couple of sessions, 4 sessions today. This one here is really talking about the value of communications. We're talking about managed collections risk, and then affordability and vulnerability, and finishing off with the cost of living. But this one here, we're going to really focus on communications, and sort of communications is kind of at the core of a lot of what collections is. How do we get hold of people? What do we say when we get hold of people? How do we sort of interact with people, and sort of trying to get engagement for people? And it's a huge part of the collections process. And I think in some ways collections is a lot of it is really about this. I mean, be it digital or be it sort of over the phone or even in person as well. And this area here has been a huge amount of sort of technological change, I suppose, over the last few years, particularly all through the pandemic, and we've sort of seen this sort of shift from more sort of like in person to calling type technology, and digital's definitely sort of been increasing as well. So we're going to talk a bit about that today. Sort of what are the best strategies? How is engagement with customers sort of like changing? What's the best mix between people and technology? How is that changing today on the ground, given everything that we've been through, and what do we think is going to be sort of going forward as well? So I'm going to introduce the panel. We've got Nick Cherry, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Phillips and Cohen Associates, and they do outsource services, and obviously they have a deceased and probate services as well, well known for that. We have Mark Oppermann, who's the co-founder and Chief Revenue Officer for Webio, and Webio are in the sort of conversational middleware. I think so. They do chatbots, messaging, etc., and all sorts of different types of digital interaction. And then last but definitely not least, we got Frank Sherlock, who many of you will know from Callminer. He's the VP of International, and they're specialists in conversational analytics. So just welcome everyone to the group, and I think we're going to have an interesting conversation. So a little bit about just thinking about cost of living to start. And Mark, I was going to ask you this question first, just to kick off with the cost of living and changing in the economic background. I mean, how are you sort of seeing? You've obviously seen a huge change in sort of customer interaction, how we interact with people, and you've sort of been a part in the center of that. But how are you sort of seeing that change now, particularly with the cost of living sort of coming through, at least anyway, the last sort of like 6 months or so?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, Chris, that what we're seeing from our clients is that certainly the volume of engagement and that sort of let's call it attempt to engage has certainly gone up. And you mentioned, you touched on the COVID and through the pandemic and the change that we have seen. That was been for us was a sort of that catalyst moment to move people away from, as you called it, that in-person collections, to think about actually automation and digital and stuff like that. So that's certainly something. And again, we're going to get into that conversation today. But what we're seeing is definitely an increased volume, and it is a case of where that the conversations that people are having are definitely they're more difficult now because there is less disposable income out there. So it's a real challenge for companies to engage and have those empathetic conversations with people to understand where they are. As I said, we'll get into it a little bit later, but definitely the ability where our clients can have those conversations, when they're right to have them on digital, but also, obviously the phone will come into that a lot, and that in person, that sort of, that empathy that the agent can give is something that is important as well.
And Nick, I'm quite interested in your perspective, sort of being more on the sort of like on the servicing side, and obviously Mark just mentioned there around empathy and some of the things that obviously you have quite sensitive conversations. I mean, how have you sort of seen sort of digital kind of flowing through your processes with the clients that you deal with?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Thanks, Chris. I would agree with Mark in terms of the volume that we've seen. That level of engagement from consumers is actually very encouraging. Our fear as creditors or debt collection, debt buyers has always been that people put their head in the sand and don't engage with us. So I think digital certainly provided that additional opportunity for that. But I think to your point, Chris, then it's when do you need to flick the switch? Digital can be more transactional. I think it's fantastic at dealing with balance inquiries and relatively straightforward opportunities for engagement. But I think there's definitely a time when there's a need for a conversation to truly dive into affordability, vulnerability, the customer's circumstances, and that still needs an agent in a lot of cases. So I think we've been very careful in all of our markets as to when do we make that transition, and trying to make it as seamless as we can as well. I think that's an important thing, is that we're in a world where now a consumer expects that digital engagement will flow seamlessly into more traditional mainstream engagement methods.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, and I sort of use this phrase sort of flippantly around peak digital. Do you think we sort of reach this sort of like peak digital? I mean, or is it just really a reflection of sort of like maturity of understanding of the technology? Because you're sort of describing a much more sort of nuanced kind of environment than some of the conversations that we've had before, which has been like, well, we put everything online and we do everything sort of automated. I mean, do you think it's that sort of maturity that's kind of coming through? And I'm quite interested in, I'll come to you, Frank, in terms of like how you sort of monitor some of it as well. But I mean, are we sort of reaching almost like a peak in terms of, or a maturity in that kind of model of communications?
For me, Chris, yeah.
I
think that digital first consumers, there's a whole generation of people who have been brought up with the ubiquity of smartphones, etc. And they prefer to converse on digital channels. They'll be more responsive, perhaps in early stage collections. They don't answer the phone. They only answer the phone to people that are in their friends groups, etc. And then there's the traditional consumer that prefers to be contacted on the phone. And I think it's about having a omni-channel journey orchestration. It's about being able to contact people on the channels that they prefer to be contacted on, but recognize that, Nick and Mark both touched upon this, the conversations with high levels of vulnerability, regulatory obligations, etc. They can be complex, and they can need empathy, they can need ownership, they can need signposting. But I think where it works best is where you're doing at the front end, you're contacting customers on the channels that they prefer. But when they break out into a human assisted channel, you've got good journey orchestration, and you've got good analytics to understand what's happening across that customer journey.
And how do you start thinking about, I suppose, linking the pieces together that Nick was just talking about, in terms of, like, it feels like there's that process work in the background around sort of creating engagement, and it sounds like all of you have sort of been working on that in terms of, once you get hold of someone, and how do you start sort of creating those linkages to make sure that everything works together? I mean, what's your advice on that, Frank?
Well, I think to me, it's about having data. You've got the data there. You've got the data in large volumes. It's about being able to analyze that data, understand. Perhaps a very simple example would be use analytics to understand perhaps where the transactional self-service channel is failing. What is it? What are your consumers saying when they break out into other channels about their digital journeys, and then going back and correcting those digital journeys. It's an iterative process, Chris. Yeah, there's not one answer that says it's perfection. It's about using the data, feeding that data back into the cycle, making the modifications, and then seeing if them modifications have worked.
I can see you nodding there, Nick, in terms of probably the process that you've kind of used. So it's almost like we put the technology in, but it's then that iterative process around how do you then process improvements, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more, Chris. I think Mark summed it up very well. I think COVID's been that accelerator pedal to a lot of organizations' digital ambitions. I think everyone had it somewhere in their to-do list. And then very quickly we had to dust these things off and make them a reality. So I think, the next phase for me is that iterative process of, making sure that the customer journey is optimal, making sure that there's no customer detriment along the way. That there's no forgotten customers, those that either don't want to engage digitally or can't physically engage digitally, and we always need to be mindful of those populations. But I think it really is now about refining those journeys, and looking at understanding are they optimal? Is there any fallout from them?
And I'll put a little bit of more texture onto that as well, that we're talking about getting the balance right, but actually there's some instances where digital is the right channel, because let's face it here, look, people in debt, when you look at that, your sort of your adult scorecard for life, it's a bit of a failure that you feel bad about that, you're embarrassed about it. And any of the surveys that you've done, or that we've done, that you look at, that when people talk about debt collection, there's a strong cohort between about 35 to about 40% of people that will always say that they don't want to speak to an agent because of the embarrassment factor. So there's it's about getting that right. And I think Frank was on the money there. It's about that conversational design first off, but then that iteration each time, that you have to use the data to be able to go, well, actually, how can we make that better? Now, the key thing there is that you have to be able to do that. So people talk about technology and what have you, but there's no point in having this massive thing that you've built. And once you've built it, you kind of go, nobody can touch it now. It's that forever and a day. And that's where, if we go back a number of years, that was what technology was like then. But really, modern cloud-based technology, that should be servicing and helping your business by that configurability, that ability to use the data, and also then sort of make sure that it is, servicing the need for the business, as in, what's the job to be done, and doing that. But just a small point, we commissioned a sort of quite a large consumer survey last year, and just asking people, credit collections and payments and debt, what were their favorite channels. And you're right, Frank, when you say you look at two for 55 plus age group, email and phone were still the most popular. But interestingly, when you look at the, say, SMS or WhatsApp, there wasn't it wasn't twice the size. I think it was about a 7% gap between a 55 plus to a 25 to 34-year-old. So, I think we all sometimes try to categorize older people phone, younger people Snapchat, that's for example. Actually, we need to be mindful of those sort of stereotypes and putting them in a bucket, because it's not always the right way to do it.
Yeah, I've just had a couple of Snapchats there I need to respond to later on.
I was sorry about sending you those, Frank.
I was hoping you got my Snapchat, Frank. All right.
Chris, one of the points that I think that we've seen in this is that what the calls that break out to the human channel that need empathy, ownership, signposting, need to be cognizant of all the regulatory obligations. Them calls tend to be longer. We've seen, just generally speaking, we've seen that they tend to be longer. And one of the things, and I think we'd probably be touching on this, Chris, is don't forget how technology can support your colleagues and agents to help them navigate through these complex conversations in an optimal manner for both the consumer and to make the employee feel good about the job that they're doing on behalf of the consumer. So it's not just about the technology to help the if you like the customer journey. Also think about the technology that's going to help the employee, the associate, the agent do a better job as well.
I mean, it feels like, so I'm just going back to the cost of living, I suppose, and we're all sort of basically looking for, I suppose, will there be increased volumes coming through? I mean, that's one of the ways we've got to think about how we're going to handle increased, potentially contact volumes coming through, or customer communication volumes coming through. I mean, digital's definitely been looked at as being a solution for that. And yet, yeah, it feels like it's more nuanced around that in terms of actually there's quite a lot of work just to make sort of like, how do you sort of filter that down to understand, well, when is it the right journey versus not? And it sounds like, I mean, what you were saying, Mark, it's not easy demographics to be able to do that. It's much more sort of nuanced around how you actually work out who goes down what channel. I mean, what's been your experience, I suppose, around how you work out who goes where? I mean, maybe Nick, maybe comment a little bit around that in terms of like, what's the response to say, well, actually, this person here actually should be digital, and wants to go down a digital, proactively responding on a digital, and we know that we can create them and engage them using digital channels, whereas this person here, we definitely don't, and we need to sort of talk to them because it's going to be more complex, and we have to do that.
Yeah, that really comes back to sort of something I mentioned, the conversational design, that you actually have to make sure that you're building in, when you're looking at a digital journey, that not everybody is going to engage. So it comes back to, again, then the data on who's engaged, who hasn't engaged. And you talk about sort of the scale, and it has increased. There's no two ways about it. But also the challenge is, if you look at the backdrop of the marketplace, that you ask any collections operation, staff-wise, is easy to get staff, and they'll all go, no, it's bloody hard to get staff at the moment and retain staff. So, that's a double whammy, that, companies are having to do more with possibly less resource. So more than likely, the first port of call will be, let's actually try to engage on digital. And it's probably a sensible way. It's the cheapest way to, the cost of engagement and all the rest. But I think people rush too quickly to try to say, well, we're going to do everything digital. And actually, that to me is like, you know, digital channels, all that. That's what our business is. But it's a fundamental flaw if you actually want to think about, we're actually going to push everything down the digital route. So it's about getting that balance right. But even in a digital conversation, being able to seamlessly blend the agent into that conversation to be able to pick up the conversation where there's a high level of complexity. And then with relative ease, should they want to engage over the phone, have that ability as well. So I would come back to just say, it's really critical to get that conversational design right, to make sure that you know, it's not one channel versus the other. So it shouldn't be, you know, one trying to fight with the other. It's about all the different channels complementing each other, but it is that the design element. Now, just the last point I would mention there would be that technology today, we've moved on so much in the past 4 and 5 years. 5 and 6 years ago, people talked about APIs and real-time information and all that type of stuff. We're there today. It's super easy. So you know, all of these technologies are a lot more capable to give people the right type of information immediately. So and that also can then say make immediate decisions to say what channel is right. So there's a lot there. There's not one simple answer, but it does come back to good conversational design.
Yeah, the one piece that keeps coming back, and Nick, I'll ask you to comment as well, is really around flexibility. Even in the conversational design, it sounds like it's flexibility, and just like we have to be flexible in terms of like the different channels or the different engagement methods we have, you have to be almost like flexible within the conversation as well to be able to have that as well, and to be able to pick up on some of those things.
100%. Look, I think Mark hits the nail on the head there, is that, you know, there are the conversation can very quickly go from a digital transaction or what's my balance to then actually I need a much more in-depth conversation. And I also don't think we should pigeonhole, and I know we weren't doing this, but consumers into they are one or the other. You know, it can just depend. If someone's walking around the supermarket, they might just want to fire a text back. When they get home that evening and they've got the paperwork handy, they may want to sit down and have a totally different phone conversation. And it's for tracking who's doing what, when, and how they're interacting between the different communication channels is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, and I suppose, Frank, in terms of like engagement analytics, and particularly from a, you know, I mean, the conversations are probably going to get more complex now than they were, and you have to sort of like link it back to even sort of part digital conversations. Now, how do we start thinking about sort of measuring the quality of engagement analytics and sort of like making sure the engagement is actually working versus not? I mean, what's kind of the thinking of that? Obviously, we've got voice analytics that's out there, and there's, you know, message analytics that are out there, but I mean, where are we moving to? Because it feels like it's getting more complex, not less complex.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, very simply, these conversations, irrespective of whether they're on digital channels, whether they're asynchronous or audio channels, you know, the data and you know, the key part of conversation analytics is to be able to link that data together. You know, a journey that starts on web chat that breaks out into human channel, understanding at scale why that's happening. It could be a perfectly natural thing to happen. It could be that for that type of conversation, it reaches a point where the chat bot can only take it so far, and it needs to go to a human conversation. Or it could be it should have been dealt with transactionally. It didn't need to go to a human channel, but there was a challenge with the chatbot. So being able to link all of these parts of the journey together as data and to optimize each element of that journey is really where conversational analytics sort of comes to play when it comes to journey orchestration and making sure that the journeys are optimal and joined up end to end as best you can. But there will, you know, my view is you will always need human beings, you know, collections, you know, just I've yet to see, Mark, a chatbot that can truly show empathy and ownership, and I'm sure we'll talk about ChatGPT later on. But what I've seen, so for example, I was looking the other day at sort of one of our customers' sort of profiles, and the number of calls has dropped by about 30% as a result of things being serviced digitally. But the number of hours of conversation hadn't altered dramatically because they're more complex conversations. But without digital, you'd have needed more and more people to service these calls. So digital first, and digital absolutely has a part to play. But don't forget the human beings. And as I said earlier, I'm sure we'll talk about this, Chris. Let's think about how we can help the employees do a better job.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely I mean, it feels like, I mean, the calls are getting we're getting more complex, but I mean, that's the real value add there. And I suppose there's huge amounts of value in the data that you're gathering as well, that actually can inform the process and inform a little bit about the customers as well. I mean, you can scrape that automatically, then that can help you generate better processes, better customer journeys for better engagement, right?
Absolutely, you're doing this holistically as well. So you're doing it across. You're not just dip sampling and trying to find the needle in a haystack. With conversation analytics, you can look at all of the conversations. So you've got holistic view as to what's happening. You can identify the outliers, and you can look at the areas that need to be addressed as a priority.
Yeah. No, Frank, you mentioned ChatGPT. It was on my list of questions. I'm sure most of us have seen it. I mean, it's quite compelling when you look at it. Certainly when I'm asking about trivial questions. I mean, it seems to give me poems about collections in the style of Shakespeare very well, and all sorts of things like that. But I mean, so it's very impressive. But I mean, where do you think that kind of technology is sort of taking us next? I mean, is that a new step that you think is going to come along that can maybe automate a little bit more? That, I mean, we won't get rid of people, it sounds like, because we need to have those in-depth conversations. So it will change the dynamic. Is it going to change the dynamics further, do you think?
Ooh, yeah, I think so. There is a lot of hype. This describe your company in the way that Shakespeare would describe it, for example. It's really clever and it's really sexy. But the ability to have really complex interactions way beyond what if you like today's traditional chatbots has got huge amount of potential. But my view is it's not ready yet to put ChatGPT on the fly in what you're doing with your consumers. I think where it plays a part today is to experiment, to use it for your conversational design, perhaps, Mark. Yeah, people who are designing conversations. Use it for to improve your speech analysts. Experiment with it by all means. I liken it a little bit to, and I know this is possibly not the best analogy, but if you think about the speech recognition as a technology, for example, it's been around for 20 years. I think ChatGPT will have a much quicker maturity curve than Prep. But it's only now that if you take something like, if you're on a Teams meeting, I don't know if anyone's tried this, and you put transcription on for your Teams meeting, things like Microsoft Azure Cognitive Services transcription is really, really good now. But it took millions and billions of hours of training data to get it to that stage. And I think ChatGPT, as I say, I think the maturity curve will be quicker, and I think it's got a huge potential use now. We certainly are embracing it in what we're doing but it's not ready for prime time, on the fly, complex interactions, is my view at the moment.
Yeah. I'd agree. Just on that, the ChatGPT. Look, there's lots of different technologies out there. Why is ChatGPT the one that we're talking about? Frank, you've mentioned that Microsoft have put millions of hours into their transcription. There's millions of hours gone into this. So it's only a training thing. It's the more that you invest, the more that you'll get out. So it is very clever. It's probably not ready to go at this time, but there would be uses for it even today. The likes of somebody sends in a long email to you, and there's the ability maybe to give that summation back to the customer to say, are these the main points that you want us to address? Simple things like that. But then you do get into the area around GDPR, around compliance, around these technologies. It is super. We're in the hype, sort of going up on that curve at the moment. But if we remember back a few years, there was a Microsoft Tay that they had to turn it off within 48 hours. It was being gamed. It was racist and a whole list of other things. So there is, from a business and an industry, that we do have to be very conscious that, the way that we engage with people, it is highly regulated. So it will. And if I was to put ChatGPT to one side, really where I think we are all going to be in 4 and 5 years out is we're going to have more of a personal digital assistant, and that will be on your phone. So that will be more fine-tuned to your requirements. We'll be able to do a whole range of, there's early versions of that now. So I think what you'll see is ChatGPT and many others, Bard and others that you hear about. It's just they seem to get in all the limelight at the moment. It will just be one extra thing along the road to give a proper digital assistant on your mobile device at some stage in the future. So it's just one step on a long journey, I would say.
It's quite interesting because I mean this one here is called Chat GDP, right? So we all think of it in terms of like chat, but actually there's these other functionalities in it, as you say. As much as we focus on chat, there's actually like how do you summarize a piece of text? How do you pull out to do items? How do you pull out key points, which I think could be sort of very helpful from in the call center environment if you're actually talking with someone, even in terms of like overlaying that on transcription, right? So you're trying to summarize what are the actual points and where are the points you want to get to. I mean, Nick, I don't know if that kind of resonates with some of the things you're thinking, almost like as a co-pilot that helps you sort of help navigate some of the interactions.
Yeah, look, I think firstly, ChatGPT has been great marketing, right? So they've come from nowhere to be a global phenomenon. So somebody's doing that right in the background, and congratulations to them. But I think it's probably woken a lot of people up to the potential of machine learning, and where you could use it in your business, and how it can complement the traditional things that we've always done in an operation. But I think it needs significant amount of refinement ahead, and I'm sure Mark and Frank are looking forward as technology businesses to doing exactly that. But it's probably, for me, it's a way away yet.
Yeah, I mean, also go back to the employee piece, Frank. I mean, I know you mentioned that a few times in terms of like, I mean that surely that is an area. I mean, there are other areas where you can sort of like take the pressure off employees and using technology to take the pressure off employees. I know you were talking about that earlier, but I mean, this is another potential one potentially.
It is, and Mark talked about, so AI and machine learning have been around for a good while. We've had them in our products for many years, and Mark talked earlier about the proliferation of things like open APIs, etc. Real-time transcription. What I was alluding to when I was talking about employee engagement is when these employees are having these highly complex conversations, try and make it easy for them. So in real time, when they detect vulnerability, to be able to use real-time analytics, say, hey, vulnerability's been detected, use the APIs, pull up the signposting and guidance, put it at the agent's fingertips so they can deal with that call effectively, and also feel that that their employer has invested in tools and technology to help them do a better job. Because when it comes to attrition, we're all human beings. That if we feel that our company that employs us is providing tools and guidance and training to help us do a better job, we're less likely to attrit. And there's an absolute link, I think, between employee engagement and customer experience. Highly engaged employees or highly motivated with the right tools, training and technology will provide a better customer experience. So there is tech around, real-time analytics being one example, using APIs that will help. And I think you've had some experience, Nick, of that in your world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've used that extensively over the years, as you say, that real-time push to agents, not just from a signposting perspective, which is fundamental from a customer experience perspective, but then from, if it's been a tough call, and the technology's detected that instantly, then saying, right, go debrief with your manager, take some downtime, because what we don't want is that employee taking it onto the next call, or taking that stress home with them either. So I think you're right. There's a holistic approach in terms of supporting our people, but also at the same time that develops a better customer experience.
Yeah. How do we? So we got customer duty that's going on in the background. Customer duty that's going on in the background. I mean, how do we start thinking about how we measure good engagement and using data to measure good engagement and technology to sort of create that virtual loop. And we talked a bit about, processes, I suppose, in terms of process design and getting customer journey design right. But how do we think of it in terms of like outcomes and engagement? And how do we measure whether the customer's actually engaging? And then use that data to then say, well, look, this is how we can then test to then make even better engagement or get even more customers engaging. And any kind of thoughts on that, and sort of like where we take that, particularly with what's sort of in the background, I suppose.
I can, so if you think about the customer effort, customer effort and customer experience can also be intrinsically linked. So where there's holes, where there's transfers, where there's lots of repeat language, where there's contextual understandability, or these sort of things all add frustration. They add time, unnecessary time and cost to the company providing the service. They add frustration to the consumer. And we in our world, we have a customer effort score. We can look at every transaction and say, was there high levels of customer effort and therefore poor experience on that call? And then take that data and say, what are the key factors that were driving that? Is it agent knowledge and training? Is it availability of data? Is it a particular type of call and call driver that we need to? So we can look at the data to try and improve the experience, to lower the effort, lower the friction, and improve the experience. And that's how I would look at it. But Mark,
I think one of the things there, Frank, that up to now, a lot of people have thought, and I'm going to categorize here, a phone call empathy and understanding and detecting vulnerability, digital being a bit cold, impersonal, and all the rest. But what we have been doing over the past 2 years now is around our propensity studio, and this is where AI and machine learning, again, when you put a lot of time and effort in, you will get a result out, as we were talking about the ChatGPT. But what we're doing is that it's a bit like what you said around the analytics, Frank, is analyzing as the conversation is happening. What we're doing, and this is a digital conversation, this could be WhatsApp, this could be SMS, this could be web chat, Viber, whatever digital channel, doesn't really matter. But it's looking and it's scoring the conversation as it's happening with what is the most likely outcome. And that operates between about 80 to 85%. It'll go up a little bit, it'll come down a little bit, and that's just the way that these models work. But one of the biggest things that our clients are seeing is, again, we talked about it already, they have huge amount of scale coming through their company. They're not always going to have agents available. So what the digital technology is now doing is identifying where there's potential vulnerability. Now it's looking at all the other outcomes and it's predicting those outcomes with 85% accuracy. But what that will allow a business to do, and we talked about it earlier, that conversational design. It's a bit like we mentioned just there that a conversation was had. It was a difficult conversation, and probably when they went to their manager, the first thing that they would say is, oh, okay, they'd empathize and they go, right, if you knew what the outcome was, would you do anything different? And there's always that learning experience. And that really, what we're seeing is our clients, if they're identifying the most likely outcome very early on in the conversation, and typically it's within about 3 utterances of the conversation being started, that they're now in designing more different conversation routes, more personal journeys for these different circumstances. But definitely when it comes to vulnerability, that's one big one where it's trackable, it's identified, right? Do we do something different with that now to bring it to a more skilled agent or to a different type of route? So there is, technology is playing its part in sort of, leaning into that duty of care. And also it's about that ability to do it at scale. So, technology is catching up very quickly with what we traditionally had said was the skills of the agent. Now, I'm not saying that we replace the agent. I'm absolutely with Frank there. We're never going to get rid of agents, but the technology can take a lot away from the agent, and as was mentioned earlier, phone calls being longer allow them to give them the time to actually delve into those complex issues. That's something that we see a lot of.
Go ahead, Nick. You're gonna jump in.
Yeah, no, I guess just going back to your original question though about what does Consumer Duty making us do in terms of how we're using this technology, and it's something I feel quite passionately about. Is I think as operators we have to choose the right metrics. The title of this session is collections, and the whole think tank is collections technology. So we tend to focus on, are we getting incremental RPCs? Are we improving cure rates or cash collection? And those are, for all of us, those are the meat and drink of our business. But I think there's an onus on us here to make sure that we're also looking at metrics to understand people who are failing in the customer journey, identifying those pain points in our digital journeys and how we resolve those. I see too many operators who've never phoned their own IVR or gone through their own self-service portal. And it's quite startling for some people when they do. Digital's fantastic in so many ways, and we've embraced it globally. But the reality is that you do need to really understand where those pain points are. Frank uses the phrase friction, which is something I use on almost a daily basis here at PCA. Where are those pain points and points of friction in the customer journey? And what are we doing to track and identify and resolve those?
Yeah. I mean, I was coming back to, I suppose, just on Consumer Duty around, so like, are we meeting, the consumer outcomes? I mean, so their outcomes, are we meeting their objectives? Are we helping them get to their objectives? And one of the best ways to sort of engage me is to help me meet my objectives as quick as possible, right? And that can be through the collections journey as well. And I just wonder if that's a lens, is that a lens of engagement that we can use to sort of almost to measure that? I mean, you can look at like, are you meeting the objective? What is the objective? Are you getting the objective? Are you getting there as quickly as possible? Are you reducing friction to get there? I mean, because those could potentially all be quite good measures of engagement. I would have thought.
I'd agree with Nick and you, Chris, on that you need to think about, with Consumer Duty, think about some different metrics other than perhaps the traditional business metrics. I would argue, as I would as a technology guy that's in conversation analytics, it's really hard to be able to, how do you ensure that for every customer touch point you've delivered the right outcome if you've not got analytics to analyze that data? It's hard without technology, I think, to keep on top of the Consumer Duty obligations in reality.
And do it at scale, Frank, is the big thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I do think that the shift in mindset that Nick alluded to about having different metrics other than perhaps the traditional, RPC and collection rate sort of metrics, it is necessary for the organisations that are servicing the debtors.
One thing I would say there, Chris, is that, and this is nothing to do with technology, and it's a really simple thing, just treat people with respect. What you found is, and again, I'll be a little bit critical, that some of the messages on digital channels going back, not as bad now, but some of them are a bit more, let's call them autocratic. You need to do this, you need to do that, and nearly that's, somebody goes, jeepers, where actually you need to get people into a conversation. Sometimes you may just need to engage with them without saying that you owe me something and just trying to get that door open. So language can be an incredibly powerful thing to be used correctly. And that's something that, we certainly try to advocate, because we're looking always try to reimagine the way that you can engage with your customers in a more empathetic way, because actually both it's a win-win for the customer, but let me tell you, it's actually good for the business as well. So if we strip away all the technology and just say, can you just have a proper conversation with somebody rather than trying to bash them over the head? Now, I'm being sort of confrontational when I say that, but it's trying to make a point and exaggerating it.
Yeah, Yeah, it feels like there's also like, how do you get them to engage initially? For me, is sort of like, how do you get them engaged initially, and then once you have them started to have that engagement, it's then how do you then get the engagement around the rest of the journey as well? And it feels like it's almost like splitting into those kind of two really a little bit. There was a question that came through. I just want to move on
the other thing I would just say on consumer duty is I think it creates an onus for us to build off ramps. Right, digital's fantastic, but sometimes the consumer doesn't want to follow that path or physically can't. And I think what we've got to do is be willing to invest in clearly signposted off ramps and track things like the EODs that our digital technology might be producing, and to be attuned to that at board level to make sure we're tracking the right MI. Really, really important. I know we've just developed a notify now deceased notification process, and right from design, we've built very clear off ramps so that if consumers just want to have an immediate conversation, they've not got to press 19 times to achieve it. Making your people available and being willing to make that investment critically important.
Great point, Chris or Nick. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a question. The question I was going to ask was just around engaging staff, and actually I was going to come to you, Nick, on that in terms of we finding that we talked a lot about digital interaction. We talked about how it can't replace the agent. You still have to have the agent, but do you still get a sense there's still resistance around it? And particularly when we talked about ChatGPT, that was talked about as being customer service, as being one of the areas where it could sort of like replace people. Do we have that sort of resistance? Do you sense there's still resistance levels that could sort of block adoption or make adoption sort of more difficult, even within the call centers? Or is that something we have to deal with?
I'm not sensing that. To be fair, I think if I look across our 6 different offices of PCA in every country, we've seen, people, we're using this technology in our daily life, right? We're all consumers. We're all embracing this with the organizations that we interact with. And I think very quickly, our call center teams across the globe have realized that it can complement what they're doing. It can truly make their life easier. If I'm sat on the phones and I have to take every consumer verbally through an ID verification, or I know that every right party contact presented to me, it's already been done, I know which one of those 2 options I would take. And we've really seen our people get on board with where does digital technology make their lives easier, and it's actually been very positive.
Yeah, and I suppose to your point, Frank, the data you were saying is actually not making the calls shorter anyway. You're actually getting to probably more interesting calls and slightly longer calls, if anything.
Yeah, and also I think even the agents themselves will also be potentially not just users of digital technology, but they could also be in vulnerable circumstances and hardship as well. So it's about being attuned, I guess, Nick, to helping your workforce to do the best job possible, but being empathetic and sympathetic to them when they're dealing with callers in difficult circumstances, because they may also be the same themselves. So
yeah.
I would agree. Look, our most expensive investment globally is our people. I'm sure that's any call center organization, and we would much rather have, if digital can help with the transactional elements of the interaction, I'd much rather have our people and our talent adding value where their compassion and skill sets can come to the fore.
And you'd like to use technology to manage attrition, to make them less likely to attrit, if that's a word, from your organization, because you've invested in technology to help them do a better job. I think there's a win-win with technology.
The funny one there, guys, is that we were showing, and again, it was a team of agents that typically were on the phone, and this doesn't happen too often, and Frank will testify to this. Technology is great, but you don't too many times get a number of agents giving you the jazz hands. Oh my God! And it was an income and expenditure, and it was just moving to a digital format, and it was how much time a day is this going to save us? Now, it wasn't always, they were all, but it was just so funny that actually, and you're absolutely on the money, Nick, that actually when you put it in and it's sensible, it can work really well with the agents. And as I said, you don't get sort of the audience too many times giving you the jazz hands, but that was just one moment where you kind of go, okay, this is worth it.
No, I think I&E is a good area, I think, Mark, where technology can be applied and you can use AI, etc. It can look and say, well, can it really, is your council tax really that low, or are you really paying that much for your phone? Or I think there are elements that tech can really have a part to play, that the agent hasn't got to go through the sort of the more turgid elements of the call, and can concentrate on helping the consumer.
I'm not sure if the technology could keep up with the ever increasing gas and electricity prices, but there we go.
We're on the way down now, Mark, and it's all good.
I just think what you're saying there is interesting. It comes back to almost like having transparent, honest conversations. I mean, a lot of consumers. I mean, they don't want to be having the difficulties they have, and they want to solve their own problems. And most people are like the vast majority, nearly everyone. I mean, are good people, and the agents they want to do a good job, right, as well. So it's like it's kind of like, and it's having that transparent, honest conversation around how do we give them the tools, how do we give them how do we give the customers the tools to do that, rather than sort of holding things back. And it just seems like that's what you're saying. It seemed like that was like a common theme to a certain extent about treating people like people.
Yeah, if you can give the right tools to help the consumer and the right tools to help the agent from a tech perspective, that's, I think, where you get that sort of optimal balance and outcome.
Yeah, it's making me feel all warm and fuzzy on a Thursday.
That's my job, Chris.
Yeah, so that's good. So a couple of last questions. So one that came through was just around complex systems and processes, really around bias, I suppose, within systems. Just when we're talking around that, and how do we sort of guard against that? I know we talked about that a little bit first, but I don't know if anyone's got a comment on that. And is it just sort of we've got to be careful of how we put it in? I mean, is there any sort of thoughts on it? Maybe for Frank or Mark.
I think it comes back. There's a couple of things I'd talk about there. One is you have to recognise it's iterative. I don't think, Mark, you'd agree that the journey orchestration or conversation design is once and done. People change, processes change, technology changes, regulations change. So you've got to be mindful of the fact it's not once and done, and use the data. The data will guide you to what needs to be changed. The data will guide you to the points of bias. The data will guide you to where things are breaking down. If just use the data. And there are technologies, Mark's got technology, we've got technology that can help you to take that data, to structure it and use it in a meaningful manner to affect the change that's necessary.
Yeah. And I agree, echo the points. It comes back to just, that iteration. Businesses are always changing their message. So actually the way that you engage with your customers should sort of change and reflect that as well. So, but absolutely, the key thing is don't be bringing your bias or prejudice to it. The answers will be in the data. Get the reporting suites to be able to give you the right information to make the right decisions.
Yeah, I would just add on that. I think look, regulation brings a burden and an expectation, and I think we're in the service sector, and our clients would expect us to have the right guardrails in place. Yeah. If I look at the US, we've got the Fair Lending Act, and it would be very easy for demographics, zip codes, postcodes, as we call them, to start to become a natural data point that AI learns around. And I think having sat through 1 million client audits, they expect us to have the right controls and systems in place to make sure that the AI isn't overstepping.
Yeah, just on that point, Nick, actually, it's nearly counterintuitive, but it's true. When you, for us, when you start to load in other information, actually the accuracy decreased. So actually, some of these things can be inhibitors to give you the right. So people always think, X, Y, or Z, and we'll put them in, pigeonhole them a certain way. Actually, don't, because done correctly, you don't need those. And again, there are certain rules around sort of AI and all that type of stuff, that transparency. So you need to have, it's just, it's one, and it needs to be explainable as well. So it's a lot more complex now than it ever was before.
Yeah, I know there's
that's going to be an
legislation
interesting topic, Chris, for you in the future. That one, perhaps ethical AI, than using AI in an ethical manner.
I know there's that, and there's legislation coming through increasingly on AI and legislation. I know there's the AI Act going on, and the EU AI Act, and there's stuff going on in Brazil, which is, so I mean, it feels like that's starting to feed through. So, but last question before we close is just where do we go from here in terms of like the future? And like, do we seeing any sort of like new channels, new technology channels that are sort of creating? When we've been through this just like wave of change, it feels like it's quite nice actually just almost like, if you can, stop and take a bit of a breath before we go on to the next wave. But it feels like it keeps carrying on. I mean, where are we going next, do you think? I mean, maybe just ask each of you to comment. I mean, Frank, do you want to go first? Or
yeah, I think, despite the conversations, I think that AI, ChatGPT, Bard, I think will help to further fine tune the digital channels, make the digital channels more effective. Will be able to help some of the agent assistant technology. So I think that it sounds like a trite answer, I know, but I think AI over the next 3 or 4 years will smooth that landscape for everybody, will make the digital channels even more effective, will make and will help to make the agent engagement channels more effective. So we've got some announcements coming out later this year about some of the things that we're doing in this space. But yeah, AI is here to stay, and AI will help. Is what I say.
Yeah, Nick, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, look, I think we're a collections industry, and and financial services organizations, we're naturally going to look at anything that can improve our contact rates and our engagement levels with our customers. I think as long as we do so within the guardrails of regulation and privacy and data protection, I think it's natural that we'll explore those. I think it'd be interesting to see if some of the more liberally minded social media organizations permit the use of some of their technologies, in a secure and compliant manner over time. But I think it's quite natural. I do think we'll see somewhat of a reality check there, where organizations hopefully review their own customer journeys and consider, have they taken a step too far? Are they catering for all types of customer demands? Because I think some organizations, and I say this with personal experience without naming any, that you couldn't get through to a human being no matter how hard you try. So I think it needs that recalibration in some extent as well.
Yeah. And Mark, what do you think?
Just on that point, Nick, oh my God, it drives me bonkers that when you do want to speak with somebody and they put so many different sort of blockages in front of you, that's bonkers in my book. But just to answer your question, Chris, yeah, I think it's going to be that continuation of what's happened. There's going to be no overnight successes. Yeah, GPT was there and all the rest, but again, that didn't happen overnight. There was a lot of work gone into that. So really, I think it will be where we're going to see more, I'm going to say, bringing together of channels. Now, we've heard omni-channel, multi-channel, the jeepers. There's so many different ones. I think, a couple of analysts, they come up with a new term every 2 years and something like that. And it's all new. But really, it's about the different channels and ways of engaging being brought all into one place. We're seeing that happen where the likes of, your AI or chatbots, traditionally, it was very focused on one channel and one channel alone, but that shouldn't be the case. Build it once and deploy it many times. And then you're learning a lot quicker. And it's about that learning and speed that you're going to make it better. And it's that constant iteration and the ability to constantly iterate. But also then, we mentioned it earlier about the APIs. Being able to link different bits of the technology stack that you have in your business and being able to bring those bits of information into a conversation that could be for the agent, or that could be just giving that information to the customer. But that blend between digital and human That isn't going away, and I don't think it's ever going to go away, but it's optimizing that is really where I think we're going to see a lot of really clever stuff happen.
How do we sort of optimize the complexity that's just naturally being generated, and then using technology to kind of do that to a certain extent? So, well, Nick, Mark, Frank, thanks very much for making the time and chatting today. So there's some really interesting insights there. So I shall get on ChatGTP and Snapchat you all later. But I think it was interesting, definitely interesting conversation. It feels like we're definitely reaching a sort of stage of maturity in terms of like how we engage customers and how we think about it from a smart point of view and use technology to sort of really inform getting better engagement. So I think it's been fascinating. So thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah,
Cheers.
really great. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, really interesting conversation. It seems like we always drag up a new area of last couple of events we've had. Dragged up a new area of technology. We talked about the metaverse at our face-to-face event back in November, and now we're talking about Chat GPT. So it's always something new around the corner. Whether it can be applied for our industry is another matter. But yeah, thanks, Chris. That's really great, really good conversation. And of course, thanks to Nick, Mark, and Frank for their input as well. Really interesting stuff. I hope everybody's got some good takeaways in that. We had a couple of questions come in, so they were covered, but we're trying to round them up in our event review. Also, I noticed a couple of people messaged having connection issues. There was nothing wrong with the platform, so I don't know what the problem was. But rest assured, it's been recorded, so we will, if you register for the event, you will be sent a link where you can rewatch this if you want. So that'd be great. But yeah, let me round up by thanking Nick, Mark, and Frank and Chris for their contribution. Obviously, our sponsors as well, so Callminer for their sponsorship of this session and Webio for their sponsorship of the whole event and this session. We're going to have a little break now until 10:45, so it's around about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll start our next session. So in order to register and view the next session, one, you need to register, but secondly, you'll just need to log into the next session, and we'll be talking about management and collection risk. We've got 4 good speakers alongside Chris on that one. So, but for now, I'll just round up and say thank you for everybody who's contributed today, and hope to see you at a future session or event. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.